Hi everyone. I figure it's 12:31, so we'll get started. Welcome. Today we're talking about the Los Angeles EcoVillage and a 2050 model for sustainable communities. So here are our speakers and what we looked like in the before times, before the pandemic, when we had office wear and headshots. So we're going to quickly introduce each one of us. Go ahead, Lois. Lois, you're on mute.
Hi, I'm Lois Arkin. I'm the founder and executive director of the Los Angeles EcoVillage Institute, formerly CRISP, the founding organization for the Los Angeles EcoVillage. Welcome, everyone.
Hi, everyone. My name's Gideon Sussman. I'm here representing the board of the LA EcoVillage Institute, and I work with Lois on that. It's also worth mentioning that in a previous role, I worked to develop a design for the local auto repair shop, which we are turning into a community center for the EcoVillage, and we'll touch on that briefly later.
Hi everyone, my name is Devika and I'm a designer at the Perkins & Will Los Angeles studio.
Yep. Hello, I'm Ashley Stoner, an architect with Perkins & Will.
There, I am Diane Brown and I am an engineer at Bureau Happold.
Okay, we're going to today talk about the rich history and culture of Los Angeles EcoVillage. We're going to talk about a process for future planning and laying out how that might be a future vision for the community. We're going to identify strategies and technologies that could be implemented here in Los Angeles. And we're going to look to the future for Los Angeles neighborhood and see how it can be an inspiration and an example for other neighborhoods around LA. So first, Lois is going to tell us more about Los Angeles EcoVillage.
Welcome again to our Los Angeles EcoVillage. And the video you're looking at now is some kids swishing around in Cobb toward making a bench that we were making at that time. So next slide. And here, in terms of who we are, we have about 40 people who have moved to our neighborhood intentionally to demonstrate higher quality living patterns at lower environmental impacts. We have a housing co-op of 45 units that is owned by our Urban Soil Co-op, and underneath the buildings, the land is owned by our Beverly, Vermont Community Land Trust. There are about 61 residents that live in these two buildings. We never had any of our existing tenants have to relocate out. And we began on the ground in this location in 1993. So we're now in our 27th year. And we, again, demonstrate higher quality living patterns at lower environmental impacts. Next. So here's a little bit of a layout of the neighborhood. Our large 40-unit building also has a community room and a bicycle parking room and a food co-op in it. And next door we have an 8-unit building with garages behind it that are now all centers for activity, like our tool shop and our gym and art studio and sewing studio. Number 3 over here is another fourplex that is owned by our land trust, and commercial property behind it where we have a bike shop. And number 4 is a quarter-acre learning garden, which is essentially the original site where our EcoVillage was founded when I lived there in a fourplex that is now no more. And number 5 is our most recently acquired property, a quarter-acre auto repair shop, which we are transforming into a community hub. And down on the right side, you see an overhead view of all of those properties. Next. Yes, we have a very rich history because ours is a retrofit of a built-out neighborhood built back in the 1920s. And this is what was happening on the streets back there on the south end of our 2-block neighborhood. So, and we do also make music and dance in the streets today. So it's just a little bit of a different kind of music and a different kind of dancing. Next. We are today within walking distance of 20 bus stops and 2 metro subway lines. But this was in the olden days, the end of the line for the yellow car that came from downtown, and this was in 1962, where all the workers on that line got together for the closing day of that line. Sadly, the little cafe next door still exists, and then on the right side, on the south end of our block, there was a spa and swimming pool inside, and it was amazing. Today, this has all been taken down, and there's a youth center on the corner where the intersection is there. You can see at the bottom. And then there's a large church in the place where it says Bimini Baths. And you can see also, I think in this slide, I'm not sure, the streetcar tracks came right around here at the north end of the spa building. So you can get a little glimpse of them. And then all those fourplexes that you see the back of, that's our dead end street. And the ones on the other side of the street are all gone and now just a school parking lot. Soon to be re-envisioned. Next. So how we started, we got together with all of our neighbors. We didn't have any intentional neighbors living there for 3 years, 2 to 3 years. And this was the first tree planting with our neighbor kids. And it was after the Rodney King uprisings in 1992 that everyone is pretty familiar with, that we had been planning for another EcoVillage, new construction about 7 miles from where we are now on about 11 acres. And it was, I mean, we had planned on that for about 5 years. And then the uprisings really changed us after 6 months of meeting, asking ourselves the question about what our priorities should be in inner city Los Angeles. And we unanimously and excitedly decided that we should be retrofitting an existing built out neighborhood. And we had 5 fires within 2 blocks of this neighborhood where I had then lived for 13 years. So next. And some of the things that are going on here today, versus what you just saw in that kind of empty looking neighborhood. We have some solar panels, and people do solar cooking in these little solar ovens oftentimes. In the lower left, we have our then Councilman Eric Garcetti, now mayor, dedicating our shared street that we worked with the city to make happen, to widen our sidewalks and narrow the street and put in bulb outs and all kind of things. And where you saw all that empty land behind him, it's all very, very green and productive now. Little construction on the bulb out of the street, lower right, bicycle parking in our big building, and so forth. On the right, if you can see it, is pipe for our 24/7 recirculating hot water system, solar heated hot water system, I should say. So next slide now. And what we do, what we continue to do, we have a wonderful fence that is built out of bicycle parts, and lots of people learned how to weld for that. We have several water catchment cisterns from rainwater from our roofs. This is a little entryway to one of our units from our courtyard, and this is what the hall and stairs look like in our main building. And the last slide next is, oh, I guess that's it. Okay, I want to introduce my friend and colleague, Gideon Sussman, whom you've already briefly met, who will take it from here. Thanks.
Thanks, Lois. Okay, so After Lois has introduced you to the LA EcoVillage, I just wanted to put LAEV in a global context. It's one of many eco-villages around the world. So I encourage you to go to the Global EcoVillage Network website, which is on this page, and check out some of the many eco-villages. The definition that they have is that an eco-village is an intentional, traditional, or urban community that is consciously designing its pathway through locally owned participatory processes and aiming to address the eco-village principles in the 4 areas of regeneration, that is social culture, ecology, economy, inner whole systems design. There's quite a lot in that, but I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that eco-villages are intentional communities, they're community-led, and they're aspirational. They're aiming at achieving true sustainability, but I think they're all able to admit that they're on the path there and maybe have some way to go sometimes. So this is also from the Global EcoVillage Network website. It actually shows all the eco-villages around the world. So you can see some fairly high numbers in certain regions. It's a global community. There are 5 regions which are very well connected, and the LA EcoVillage is part of this. Eco-villages have been recognized by the United Nations as a great way of achieving their sustainable development goals. And you can see the 17 of them listed here. Eco-villages really do present an opportunity to address a lot of these. I've highlighted some of them. Zero hunger through local food production. Good health and well-being is a really central part of eco-villages. People tend to be healthy and happy. Climate action, clean water, and obviously sustainable cities and communities. These can all be achieved through eco-villages. Just quickly, a couple of examples. I had the pleasure of visiting Findhorn, which is in Scotland. They call it the mother of eco-villages. It's a really inspirational place. There's a lot of interesting things going on here, including a lot of organic food production. And they had the first living machine which in Europe, which processes all their black water. So it's very advanced in terms of its ecological design. And the next example is an eco-village I also visited last year, Tulalego, which is in South Africa. This is more of a traditional rural eco-village, and it's fairly typical of eco-villages you might find in the global south. And it's worth mentioning that the Global EcoVillage Network is a great way of connecting the global north to the global south. And so I encourage you to check out any of these eco-villages. You can go onto the EcoVillage Network website and you can find more information about all of them. And so finally, eco-villages do tend to be rural. And we know that actually the world is urbanizing, and by 2050, we expect 2/3 of the world's population to live in urban areas. And this is important to realize when we think about the LA eco-village, because it's a great example of an urban eco-village, and shows how we can employ eco-village principles to live sustainably in an urban environment. And now I think I'm going to hand over to Ashley, who's going to talk about the challenge.
Yes, so Perkins and Will first were introduced to Los Angeles EcoVillage through Boer-Happold Engineering, and we participated in a whole office half-day charrette for the Songs site, which we'll talk about briefly later. And that prompted us to ask, what's next? How can the LA EcoVillage demonstrate a car-free, equitable community? You know, how can a larger system actually work together to further some of these principles? What are the partnerships that need to happen? What are the strategies? And can we look to the future to find out what needs to happen in this community and perhaps others? So what we did is that we looked at actually at a larger neighborhood area within the LA EcoVillage area. We looked at Vermont to the west, First Street to the north, and 3rd Street to the south. And you can recognize there in the middle, LA EcoVillage that Lois explained. And as Lois mentioned, this is an existing urban fabric. It's a retrofit condition. It has a lot of history. So how do you use this as a starting point to get our communities to a place that can really address climate change and can really, look at how we're going to be living in the future? So we chose 2050 as a target for what we wanted to imagine, what we wanted to look to. And this is really a collection of strategies, imaginations and visions of what could happen in this neighborhood specifically. And really this becomes that whole systems thinking that Gideon was talking about, that actually how do you make all of it work together? What is the infrastructure, and how can we make it happen? So Devika is going to talk about our approach.
Hi, everyone. I am so excited to be able to share some of the work that we have been doing in collaboration with the LA EcoVillage. And so this image that you see here is really a snapshot of what 2050 could look like. Like Ashley said, these are various moments, various strategies that are being applied. They're really contextually driven and really adhering to the constraints of the site. But really what we're trying to do is create strategies that can actually then be learned from and taken from this site and then adapted and applied to other sites around the city. And I want to emphasize that this is not a one-size-fits-all approach. These are to become baseline strategies so that they really become well-rooted within the context, and they're really based on that specific community. And so this aims to be a demonstrative project, like Lois had mentioned. And so with applying these strategies and actually doing the work, people can learn from this urban eco-village and really learn what lifestyle changes, technological changes, and infrastructural changes we should be making. So right at the beginning of the project, we went through the what and the why of the project. The why is pretty self-explanatory, and in going through what we wanted to achieve, it was clear that this is a very holistic project. And it really includes all facets of sustainable living. It's so well woven into our day-to-day life. So we really needed a framework to help us in order to move forward and to really understand how can we set targets and milestones to really move forward to creating this LA EcoVillage that expands into the neighborhood. So we chose to go with the LA Green New Deal. And there are a couple reasons that we did this. And for those of you that are not familiar with the LA Green New Deal, it was first released in 2015, and it was last updated last year in 2019. And this plan sets aggressive goals for the city's sustainable future, with phased targets on course to have things like clean air, clean water, accessible to water, a stable climate, improving community resilience, and expanding access to healthy food and open space. So it's really a large undertaking. It's a really complex problem that we're trying to solve. And so you might be wondering why specifically the LA Green New Deal. And so the first reason is that this is a local plan. It's really rooted within the LA city, looking at what are the challenges, what are the stresses that we are facing as Angelenos, and prioritizing our efforts so we're actually making strides in helping this climate crisis locally. And secondly, the plan has made a commitment to meet the goals set out by the Paris Climate Agreement. And they're also doing work with 7 other mega cities around the globe in collaboration with the C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group. So we see that they're tackling the problem from both sides of the spectrum, the local aspect and then also tapping in to the global aspect and really deepening those relationships with other partners around the globe to really share these resources and share this knowledge because we're all aware that this is really how we are going to solve these problems. And finally, another important aspect to consider is that as architects and as people involved in the built environment industry, we really have a huge responsibility to act. And so aligning with and partnering with these political systems is really critical. And this is really a critical time to create that partnership and have that political support to keep that momentum going in really doing all of this work. And so the LA Green New Deal is split up into various chapters and then further broken into targets and milestones. We are going to focus in on these 6 specific chapters today. So housing and development, food systems, mobility and public transit, waste and resource recovery, local water, and finally energy. And these are, as you all know, really big topics. So even through these topics, we're really going to focus in through the lens of community. And why community? It's the theme of today, but it's also really that critical aspect for how we can really achieve success in all of these strategies. It's going to take every one of us to really move forward. So let's dive into the strategies. The first one I am going to talk about is housing and development. In the LA Green New Deal, they've set 2 major targets that they're trying to achieve. And really the first one is increase in housing, and not just housing, but really affordable housing, and placing housing near transit so that people are not having to rely on cars. So as Gideon mentioned, more and more people are moving to cities, and we're really going to see an influx of people that move to these urban areas. And so we're expected to have an increase of around 3.5 million residents by 2050. And so we kind of beg the question of what does that new density model look like? And the first aspect as architects and people in the construction industry will be to just make this as efficient as possible. So relying on modular systems is one approach to do this. Another really critical aspect is going to be emphasizing this indoor-outdoor connection. Given that we're located in LA, given our weather, and everything that we've all gone through with the pandemic of really craving that connection back to nature, access to things like open spaces, having really daylit spaces, and fresh air. So these are going to be critical from a performance standpoint as to how we move forward. So we're not just building up density, but these really become fundamentals that we start to embed into every single project. And then also looking at it from a programmatic sense. So including spaces like a community wellness center. And so you're, again, looking at that holistic aspect. A community library. And this isn't just a library for exchanging books, but for exchanging tools and skill sets. And so this really becomes a gathering space for community members. Looking at community gardens. So you start to weave in the aspect of food and bringing in urban agriculture. And this really starts to bring in that sense of community. And you know, an important aspect that we've all faced with the pandemic is that we're really starting to take care of one another. And so that's a really important thing with kind of weaving these programs into these densities. We begin to have spaces that we can actually take care of one another and interact with one another. So the next strategy to look at, and this is a big one, is food systems. And in fact, it's such an important one that they're still figuring out in the LA Green New Deal, you know, how do we move forward? How do we tackle this? So it's going to be interesting to see in the next update that they give how we're going to move forward. And in terms of the targets they set, they're really, it's not a conversation about yield and how many people we can feed, but it's really about increasing food resilience. And so bringing in more sites into our cities, deepening that connection to the way that food is grown is really the critical aspect here. So when looking at this strategy, we took a multi-scalar approach. So starting at that residential unit all the way up to that commercial level and the educational institute. And so we applied these 4 strategies on our site. So if we consider in 2020, it's really the site near the LA EcoVillage that is actively practicing urban agriculture. And so if we expand that out to look at the Vons grocery store and their parking lot and the LAUSD lot that's there and connecting back to the educational aspect. And then really taking advantage of any underutilized lots that are there around the community to really give back a space that is really critical for all of us. And this is also an aspect where, because food systems is such a complex issue, we see that, they're looking at targets that are increase in 25%, increase in 50%. And I think with these types of visuals, we can actually start to challenge some of those percentages and say that, no, I think we can do more. By 2050, we can be more aggressive than what these targets are setting us out for. So if we zoom in quickly to look at each and every one of these these scalar approach, when we start at the unit level at the balcony, it's really about reestablishing that connection that individuals have to growing food. And so this becomes an opportunity to provide infrastructure. So you have planter beds, you have tower gardens, and then you're also linking it back to waste. Food and waste are so deeply connected. So understanding that composting should be linked into that individual unit. And again, this is not about yield, but it's really about people testing out these strategies at a micro scale. And we know that not all units have balconies or the access to this type of infrastructure. So the residential building scale should then start to establish some of these ideas. And these really become areas that the community is taking care of together. It's a common good that people come out to gather near, and it's really a learning opportunity for the residents. And another aspect of this to consider is that when we are building these, considering what is the footprint of our building and what's the footprint of green area that we're giving back to community. So we're increasing the permeable areas, reducing the heat island effect. And so all of these things you hear, they're really interwoven within all of these concepts within density. And then also considering the low-rise multifamily units and how we can utilize those front lawns for producing food. And so looking at the grocery store model, and I would say that this is, definitely one of the more aggressive approaches. And I think it's kind of really exciting to reimagine what is the new grocery store model. And, utilizing this parking lot for actually growing food that can be locally grown, having fruits and vegetables, more tree count, and then also utilizing the rooftop. So having a greenhouse. So for any plants and things that are a little more sensitive to the context, to have a controlled environment to do so. And, you might consider, oh, well, we're taking up the entire parking lot. But let's think about, what is our life going to be like in 2050? We're going to be relying on autonomous vehicles. The relationship of us and our cars is going to change. It'll be more one about pickups and drop-offs. And so why not take up this parking lot and really use it for the benefit of the community, as well as just reestablishing that link of food, where we actually purchase food and where it's grown. And finally, one of the most important aspects of food systems is going to be this educational aspect. There is right now a really, deep lack of knowledge of food systems and urban agricultural practices for us. And so using schools as these testing grounds to really start students, starting out young from the K through 12 institutes, and then reconnecting out to higher education facilities. So these are becoming these attractor nodes where people are able to explore, share ideas, test different urban agricultural practices. And so this is really about demonstrating different strategies and not about yield. And then, considering that we're so close to numerous schools in our area, to really link the health benefits of having these types of spaces for schools and for really having more opportunity for outdoor learning for our students. The next one is looking at mobility and public transit. So there's 3 big takeaways from this chapter: increased walking, biking, micromobility, transit. And so in doing so, we're actually reducing the vehicle miles traveled. And when we are focusing on taking our car out, we're actually using zero emission vehicles and autonomous vehicles. And so when we look at our site, we're going to go through 2 examples. One is Bimini Place, which is our local street, and then South Vermont Avenue, which is our arterial street. And 2 important points to make about the site is that this site is really well connected with bus stations. We're within a 8-minute walk of the Vermont Beverly Metro Station, as well as this is where Metro is planning the Vermont Avenue Bus Rapid Transit System So we're really going to be very well connected to public transit and should not have to rely on the car. And so the first street that we're going to look at is Bimini Place. And this is our street that we would actually make it car free in 2050. And so if we look at, I'm getting a bit of feedback. Oh, there we go. Thank you. So if we look at kind of a phased approach, so the first step would be to remove street parking. So there should no longer be any street parking. We should really be using that space for the residents, for growing more trees, for permeable paving, for kids to be able to play out safely, and finally having a dedicated bicycle lane so that that's really the prioritized form of transportation in these local streets. And then looking at the arterial street of South Vermont Avenue, we really see the disconnect between how much space is going towards people and how much space is going towards the car. And so the first step again would be to remove those parking lanes and add in dedicated bicycle lanes. And then finally, really, removing those extra car lanes for that BRT that's going to be going in place. And we really start to see a shared street here. And so if we were to look at the percentages of that breakdown of how we're really dedicating space for people versus cars, now this is a much more shared street approach. And then looking at waste, and I had mentioned that this is so deeply rooted and connected to the conversation of food that we had. The biggest and actually the most aggressive goal, I would say, in some of these targets that's been set out is by 2025, so in the next 5 years, to increase the diversion rate to 90% from landfills. And I'm really excited to see how this is going to be implemented across the city. Currently, one of the plans is to have, at least for organic waste, to have drop-off locations at farmers markets. But we're suggesting that let's actually take that conversation we just had about food and bring it up and intertwine it with waste. So starting again at that micro scale of the residential unit and really spreading that across all of these scales and making sure that people have easy access to dropping off organic waste and composting, because that's it's just a complete wasted resource right now, and we should be utilizing that and kind of closing that cycle of food to waste and using that as a supplement to help our urban agricultural practices. And again, just a reminder that this isn't just about saving the environment and making sure that we're not, harming ourselves in the process, but really there are financial incentives to doing this. We are currently hauling around a lot of waste. And so the more conscious we are and the better we are with kind of reducing the amount of waste that we actually produce, the better it'll be. And to really emphasizing that educational aspect as well. And now Diane is going to talk about water and energy.
Thanks, Davika. So I'm going to very briefly talk about the engineering strategies for the EcoVillage. So with water, we are focusing on decreasing water demand, increasing stormwater capture, and increasing wastewater reuse. So we go to the next slide. With water saving strategies, we are focused on treating and reusing the stormwater from roofs and streets, and gray water for toilet flushing, irrigation, and cooling towers. We're also looking at implementing recycled wastewater, whether that be the city's purple pipe system or living machines. And note that there are already financial incentives for this. So let's look at LA as a whole. The mayor announced that LA will recycle 100% of its wastewater by 2035. And when he's talking about that, he's referring to the wastewater treatment plants and having them treat water to a certain quality where it can actually be redistributed through the city in the purple pipe system. And then it can be used by through irrigation and industrial processes. So investing in more plants like this is actually less expensive than importing water, which is why LA is headed in this direction. So if you look at the blue map, the blue on the map, there's some blue right near the word metro, and that's near our site. So most of our water will be from the stormwater and gray water reuse, But on those extra dry months or in case of emergencies, we have the potential to have a purple pipe connection just in case, and we won't feel guilty about it because it is recycled wastewater. But if we want to take it one step further, we can look into living machines. So this will also increase our resiliency and reduce the load that the city has to deal with and decrease our dependency on the city as a whole. So living machines are all unique and customizable, and they require space, sunlight, plants, and other organisms. So this system is actually a series of tanks, each tank having its own process, and the water gets cleaner and less smelly as it goes through the system. Because it is a series of tanks, living machines actually take up a lot of space. So that's the challenge when working with an urban setting. So for our site, one option is to split up our site into segments and having each segment have a localized living machine. And there might be some wiggle room where we can get some of that land near the bonds and actually have a larger greenhouse. But that's us assessing the living machine potential. But let's talk about energy. So we're trying to get 100% renewable energy. And let's go through how we analyze that. So to analyze this, we use Google Project Sunroof and looked at the amount of solar we can get on the roofs and the parking. So we found that we can get 85% of our energy from solar. But how do we get to that 100%? So we can get to 100% renewable by thinking of where we're putting these panels. For example, having solar canopies over parks, not just parking, and over pedestrian streets to also provide shade. We can also dive into increasing energy efficiency by looking into systems like heating and cooling and water heating. But for solar, there are many financial incentives. Listed here are really just a few. There's many more. So I know we've been talking about 2050, 2050, 2050, but right now we have the technology and we have financial support to really push forward and really get excited about implementing some of these strategies.
Thank you, Diane. And so moving forward, if we look back at that snapshot and reconsider that this is a demonstrative project. And so the goal, the ultimate goal would be that once we have this type of establishment, that this would really start to spread. So now we're looking at an area in Koreatown, but then this would be adapted for an area in the arts district near colleges like USC or UCLA. And this gets really woven into the city fabric and becomes kind of a new normal. And then really looking further, and that this should be a model that gets used. There should be eco-villages that are developed in all the cities across the world. And I'm going to pass it on to Gideon and Lois to close out for the song site.
So this is the auto shop that we purchased 4 years ago. And it doesn't look like that anymore, but it doesn't also look that much better yet. What we plan here is for it to become a community hub. Well, it will be an event venue for neighborhood events. It's a 1/4 acre. So we're going to get our very first tiny house donated to us next month. And it needs a little upgrading. So if anyone wants to help with that, let us know and we'll connect you with the Latch Collective, which is donating the house to us. But it may be one of 10 houses that would serve as the hostel. And then we are also going to have a seedling and plant nursery in the rear yard, and a small green business kiosk that can be rolled out onto the front yard or the backyard or the side street and so forth. On the right, we are already using the space for a variety of public events and tours, and this was a workshop we were holding with a graduate program from Harvard University of graduate architects. So we were very proud and honored for them to decide to come to learn about eco-villages with us. So we're on our way. One of the things we've done very recently is we're working on removing all the hydrocarbon residues from the floor inside the auto shop with microorganisms. And that's something that Gideon has been working on, and we've got our first round of them, and then we're going to test to see how they did. So stay tuned and get on our mailing list if you want to be invited to events. LAEcoVillage.org. All right, who's next?
I just thought I'd mention a couple of other things just quickly before we take questions. It's a really challenging site, which makes it very interesting from a design perspective. We are planning an urban farm behind the auto shop that you can see. We're going to replace the roof and add a solar array and have quite large scale rainwater collection in time. But the main challenge of this site is the fact that it's an old auto repair shop. So it's a contaminated brownfield site. And we're currently talking to UC Riverside, hoping to set up a research project to bioremediate the site to essentially clean the soil using plants and microbes. And so, yeah, we hope to develop something like that over the next few months. But that's what makes it very interesting and very challenging.
And I would just add that the purpose of working with the UC Riverside Department of Environmental Toxicology is to actually come up with a public policy and regulation for Los Angeles, because right now what happens with brownfields is that the common practice is to just dig and haul it all away and make it someone else's problem. And we think we're going to see thousands. We already have thousands of brownfields, and we're going to see thousands more, and we need to figure out how to remediate them organically with microorganisms, plants, trees, and fungi right on site. And it's not rocket science, but we need to do a little bit more research, and the city wants us to do it. And so if anyone wants to work with us on it and has an interest in it, let us know. Great. And back to you, Ashley, I think, for questions.
Yeah, well, I think finally, thank you all for participating in this session. There's already been some dialogue in the chat, and we're really excited about where the future is going. I will say that one of the things I love about the song site is that it's on First Street, and it's an outward expression of all the great work that is going on at Los Angeles EcoVillage, and to have a public meeting place right there is super, super important. So we'd love to have a great dialogue. If you have any questions, put them into the chat. There doesn't seem to be, oh, here we go. And then we can kind of address them in order.
And also, if we run out of time, you can always come to our booth, and we're going to have open discussion from 2 to 4 today. So I encourage those that are interested to come hang out with us. Great.
And I think there's 10 steps to starting your own EcoVillage.
Yeah, we can give you that too. Yay. All right. So there's quite a bit of action in the chat, which we'll be looking at.
So Alice is asking, how is the Los Angeles EcoVillage and Institute funded?
Oh, thank you. That's very good. Well, we've never been funded. No, we have. But in terms of, I think it's worth mentioning that the way in which we bought all of our properties is with what we call our Ecological Revolving Loan Fund, or ELF. And incidentally, we're still accepting loans. And so a lot of people have money traveling at lightning speed all over the world, doing who knows what to who knows who. But with us, you can loan us money and come and visit it. and you know what it's doing. But essentially, I think over $2 million we've borrowed. Most of our loans are in the $5,000 to $20,000 range. We pay interest on them, and we give our lenders quarterly updates on what's going on. And so that's been a major source of funding for the acquisition of all of our buildings. The other thing that I don't recommend, I recommend that anyone that wants to do real estate development in a nonprofit and permanently affordable way, look into having your own revolving loan fund if you have a network of people, whether you're an organization or whether you're just a private individual with a lot of good friends. So that's really, really important. I forgot what I was going to say, but it'll come back to me. What about, oh yeah, here's the other thing. Don't do this. I've been a volunteer in my organization for 40 years. This is not a good idea. So it's hard to replace me because, you know, how are we going to pay for a person that should be getting a $50,000 or $60,000 a year salary? So that's what we're dealing with right now. And incidentally, all of you folks out there, we are looking for a new associate director who has some fundraising experience in order to make that happen. So that's pretty much, and then of course, we get a small smattering of money from our public events, our tours, which are on hold now, our workshops and that sort of thing. And the other thing is that when we transferred ownership to originally, this organization, LA EcoVillage Institute, was the original we originally acquired all of the buildings, and then we transferred ownership to our co-op and donated the land underneath the buildings to our land trust. So we, LA EcoVillage Institute, formerly CRISP, now holds the mortgages on 2 of our buildings. And let me be perfectly clear that those buildings were transferred at way below market rate cost. So that also is part of, but that money goes back into our revolving loan fund, but we use a little bit of it to sustain ourselves. So, but we're looking for more. Let us know if you're interested. Well, that was maybe a little long answer.
Well, I think that also addresses Audrey's question, which is about how the projects are funded and the property is acquired. So if you have any follow-up questions, Audrey, put them in the chat.
Well, just let me add, we can direct you to our information sheet on the loan fund if anyone wants to adapt it to your own needs, and our sample loan agreement. None of our loans are recorded, so we can talk more about that in later. Okay.
Okay. Lisa is asking, how long is your waiting list for living there?
Yes, our membership process takes usually about.
Laura got it too, but go ahead.
About 6 months to a year to go through our membership process. We are a co-op, so we very carefully vet people. Are you a good fit for us? Are we a good fit for you? And then if we have housing available, you can become a provisional member at that point, or go on a waiting list, which is what's happening now. And I would say we have probably 2 to 3 units turnover each year. So that could be a while, but for those of you who can afford market rate rents, we have lots of housing in our 2-block neighborhood, and I would say that there is generally there's openings fairly regularly. Everything from studio apartments or singles to 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, very large, at market rates. Much cheaper here than on the west side, or even Silver Lake. Okay, next.
Okay, next question. Do you offer any internships?
Yes, we do. In the past, most of, I would say several of our interns have lived here with us, but right now we are probably not doing that. But if you're interested in an internship, email me and we'll see what your interests are. We always try to really match people up with something they're interested and passionate about, rather than just kind of make work. So let me know. I'll put my email address in the chat.
Okay, that seems to be all of the questions. Team, is there any points that you want to reiterate? There's so much great information. Thank you all for putting information into the chat, and Gideon and Laura for answering some of the questions.
And also thanks to Perkins & Will and Vera Happold for all the extraordinary work you've done and how exciting you've made us look. And we hope that we can do you justice in moving forward. And thank you all for coming. How many? Oh, let's see, 67 folks came to our workshop. Yay.
Thank you to everyone.
Let us know if you want to be on our mailing list and we'll keep you informed. Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Wow.
Nice meeting everybody. I'll be closing it shortly.
Wow.
Team, do you
Wow.
want to chat after?